Hi there, welcome back. So in this session, we're going to see how do you create a Azure Data Factory service, and also we're going to create a data lake as well as a SQL database because that's what we're going to require in this entire course. So this is how my Azure portal looks like. I've logged in using my Azure account. So this is a landing page. You will see something similar like this. It's just that these icons will be different for you. So let's search data factory. And if you see, we've got this data factories over here. And let's click on create. All right. So now this is a simple wizard that you have to fill in some basic information to create a data factory. It's very simple. Subscription, select your subscription. Mine is pay as you go. That's the name of my subscription. Resource group. Let's create a new resource group. So I'm going to call it ADF RG. Okay, RG stands for resource group. So, in a nutshell, what is a resource group? Resource group is nothing but logically grouping your Azure resources. Now, you can create a lot of Azure resources, but then you would want to group it into different resource groups. You can consider resource groups as folders in your operating system, right? Like, for example, you may have a dev resource group, you may have a prod resource group. In dev resource group, you can create all your development Azure services in the dev resource group. Similarly, in prod resource group, you can create all your resources, right? You can create as many resource group as you want, and then you can create resources inside that resource group. So I'm going to create this ADF RG, okay? And then in the next service, that is data lake and SQL database, I'm going to select this existing resource group and then create it under this. Okay, let's give a name for this data factory service, data factory 123. Okay, let's say if this is available. You see, okay, looks like it's not available. So I'm going to say data factory Amit course. Okay, so this is available. If you see a green mark, that means that is available. So data factory Amit course. Okay, I know this isn't the best name for a service, but then this is what I could, find a unique name. You could give any name as per your choice. So let's select a region. Now, as we know that Azure has different data centers across the globe, right? In each region, it has data centers. So you can select any of this region, whichever you want. So I'll probably keep it default as East US version. I'll keep it default as V2. Okay, so now we've selected the version as V2. Now let's select next. This is a Git configuration. Basically, this is for a source control repository. I'll just keep it default as configure Git later. We'll configure it at a later point. Networking, I'll skip this part as well. I'll keep the default. Same goes with advanced and tags as well. And directly jump to review plus create. Now it's going to run a quick validation check uh, based on the information that we provided. And then once the validation succeeds, you're going to see this create button will be enabled, right? So I'm just going to click on create. So it's going to take about a few seconds, probably a minute or two at the max, to create this data factory service. Okay, so let's wait for it to create this service. In the meantime, you could check the progress over here under notifications. Okay, and then we'll get a pop-up whenever the service gets created. Oh, looks like it's already created. Deployment succeeded. Okay. So now we could go to this resource, click on go resource, and then this is how our data factory looks like. Okay. We are of course going to deep dive into this at a later point. So this is how our data factory looks like, the one which we just created. Okay, let's have a quick overview about this service. Now, on the left-hand side, if you see, there are a few settings available. The first one is overview. This is just an information for you about the resource group in which you created it, the location, the subscription, and all that stuff. Okay, some monitoring act over here, section over here, which is very important. Just to have a quick overview about the pipelines that are running, what kind of performance it has and all that stuff. So you can monitor over here the CPU and everything like that. There is of course a separate monitoring panel or section that we are going to cover. which is available at a different place. But this is a very high level monitoring section that is available, right? Then you have activity log, access control. You can define who you want to give access and everything. And then there is some networking related stuff over here, in which if there is some networking related settings that you want to configure, you can do that as well over here. And then of course a few other settings. But honestly, the most important part of this entire service of this user interface is this launch studio. This is where you're going to spend probably 100% of your time. Okay. So just click on launch studio, and then it's going to create a new tab for you. Let's give it a moment. All right, so basically it has created a new tab for you, and this is your Data Factory Studio. And basically this is your development environment. This is where you're going to create your pipelines and run it and test it and debug it and everything, right? So this is very, very important. I'll just get rid of this notification. So this is your home page. If you're following my cursor, you see the arrow over here. So this is your home page. Some quick shortcuts available over here, which we'll cover later, but then a quick shortcuts over here, if and then a few documentation or templates available over here. Okay. Uh, Next is author. This is very, very important because this is where you're actually going to create or develop your stuff. Now over here, if you see there are pipelines. Now pipelines is nothing but the heart of data factory. Like it's a workflow which you are going to create. Any logic or anything that you any workflow that you have to build, you basically have to create a pipeline. Like for example, in SSIS, it's called a package. It's you create a SS package where you create a workflow, right? Same way in data factory, it's called a pipeline. So if I just click on these three dots and say new pipeline, and then it's going to open this window. I'll just get rid of this, and this is where you can do that, create a pipeline, a couple of activities, a lot of activities actually, for you to select and just drag and drop. For example, if let's say I want to select this activity, I'll just select it and drag and drop into this editor over here, and I can drag and drop multiple activities over here. And then you can also create a chain of activities. For example, just connect two activities, right? That is something you can do, and create a workflow based on the logic that you want to implement. Whatever ETL logic you want to implement, you can create this workflow. See, because ADF is a no code development, or very low coding is required in ADF, right? So it's mostly going to be drag and drop, and then configuring these activities based on the settings provided, like get metadata. Every activity has different settings. Get metadata has this setting, execute SS packages has different settings and all that stuff, right? So that way you have plenty of activities available for your use. Like you have this filter, you have this loop activity, you have this if condition activity, and you can drag and drop over here, and then arrange it in a manner, in a sequence basically, which you want to execute. Okay. Like for example, I've just selected three activities and connected this to one another. So when I run this pipeline, the first activity is going to be running is get metadata, and then it's going to be execute SS package, and then it's going to be if condition, right? Because that's the sequence that I have created, and I can change the sequence at any point of time. Okay, so this is a pipeline. This is what you can create a pipeline. Next is change data capture. This is basically a new feature that has been launched by the Data Factory, and it's still in preview stage. So basically beta phase, you could call it. So whenever Azure launches a new feature in any service, they basically publish it in a preview phase for some time, for a couple of months, take user feedback and all that stuff. And then after that, it becomes general available. So basically, you can create a production workloads once it becomes general available. So right now, it's in preview stage, so we'll definitely look into it, but then it is not advisable uh, to to create your production pipelines using this feature. Any feature which is in preview, it is not advised to create a production workload, right? Because it may change as well. So that's change data capture. Then you have data sets, data flows. Power Query will of course look into all of this whenever we deep dive. And then you have this trigger over here. Trigger is nothing but when you want to execute a pipeline, when you want to schedule a pipeline. You can either run it ad hoc, like just run it once, or else you can schedule it to run it on a regular basis, maybe daily, weekly, monthly, however you want to do it. So you can create a trigger over here, right? And then, so basically this is your author section over here. Next is monitor. This is where you're going to monitor your pipelines. Whatever pipelines you have triggered, this is where it's going to see, you're going to see these pipelines, and then this is where you can monitor the pipeline. If it fails, then of course go and debug the pipeline and rerun it as well. So this is a monitoring section. Next is manage. This is your, I would say, admin section, admin portal, manage. Okay. In this section, you can see all the different admin related part for your data factory services. For example, link services, you can create and configure your link services. We'll see what are link services. So for now, just ignore that part. And then you can, of course, select some security, implement some security patterns over here and everything. And also configure your Git config, GitHub and Azure DevOps, right? So this is where you're going to, do most of your admin related stuff. You'll manage the entire data factory service over here, right? So that's the manage tab over here. And then there's this learning center. There's of course some tutorials, some documentation, and all that stuff which you can verify. So, the author section is something that you're going to spend most of your time, because this is your development area, the author section. Okay. All right. Just a quick, wanted to give you a quick overview about the data factory service, but what is what in it, and then of course we'll deep dive into all of this at a later point. Thank you. All right, so now let's see how do you create a Azure Data Lake storage account, and also have a quick overview about what is a data lake storage. Okay. Now, before we jump into creating a data lake service, let's try to quickly understand in a nutshell what is data lake storage account. So, data lake storage account in Azure is nothing but a storage service where you can store your data, right? Now you'll ask me, or you would think that what is the difference between storing a data in a data lake storage account versus storing it in any other database like SQL Server or SQL Database or Oracle, right? The major difference is that in a storage account, in a data lake storage account, you can store a massive amount of data, really, really huge, terabytes, petabytes volume of data, and not just a massive volume, but then you could store the data in any format. You don't have to store only structured data. You can store structured data, you can store unstructured data, right? So you can store any kind of data. Whereas in a typical relational database like Oracle, SQL Server, DB2, you can only store structured data, right? I mean, you can only store data which has tables and columns. You can store a document in Oracle database because it doesn't have any structure, right? That is the major difference. That is a huge difference, and which is why data lakes are very, very popular these days. It's because it's capability of storing massive amounts of data at a very reasonable cost. Like imagine if you want to store petabytes and terabytes of data of your entire organization, right? From different departments. If you want to store terabytes and petabytes of data, let's say it's a structured data for now. Let's assume it's all structured data, but still storing terabytes and petabytes of data in a relational database like SQL Server and Oracle, it is going to have a massive cost. It is going to have a huge cost associated with it, right? Whereas in a data lake storage account, it is very, very reasonable. It is extremely economical, extremely cheap to store massive volume of data, and it is very easy to store as well. Because now, when you're loading the data, you do not have to define any structure. Like, for example, in Oracle or in SQL Server, whenever you want to load the data, you have to first define the structure of the table. You have to first define the number of fields in that table, right? And then you can load the data. And then, whereas in data lake account, you don't have to do anything. It's just easy loading. The data loading is extremely, extremely easy, I would say, right? And the failure chances of failure are very less if there are any changes to the structure of the data uh, in the source side. It has no impact on your data loading. Your data loading will not fail, whereas let's say in your typical Oracle or SQL Server relational database, if in the source side, if you add new columns or if you remove an existing column, your existing data load might fail over there, right? So that's the major difference over it. So basically, it's data lake storage account is typically used to store massive amounts of data because it offers very reasonable cost, very economical cost, and the data loading is very simple, very easy, because you do not have to define the structure of the data before loading the data. Now, of course, when you're reading the data, that's when you have to define the structure. But then, while data loading, you do not have to worry about the structure of the data, right? So data loading becomes extremely efficient and extremely easy, which is why data almost all organizations are implementing data lake solutions to store their entire organization's data. Okay, so that's a nutshell. That's in a nutshell what is data lake storage account. Of course, there are separate dedicated course available for in detail what is data lake and all that stuff. But in a nutshell, that's what data lake does. Now let's go and create it. Okay, let's search for storage account. So there is in Azure, if you want to create a data lake storage account, you have to search for storage accounts. Okay, and now let's click on create and click on pay as you go. That's my subscription. My resource group is ADF-RG. That's the same resource group in which I had created my data factory service. Let's give a name to this, data lake gen 2. Let's see if this is available. Okay, it is available. Okay. Region East US, I'll keep it default. Performance standard or premium, I'll keep it standard. Basically, for your production workloads, for the production environment, you might want to keep it as premium because it offers good performance. Whereas for us, for this course, I'll keep it standard. Redundancy. Basically, redundancy tells you how do you want to create copies of your data, because see, in this cloud environment, the beauty of this cloud environment is that your data is always present at multiple locations. There are always redundant copies of your data available. So even if your one server goes down or one data center goes down, your data is still secure and safe at some other location. Now, how do you want to create a redundant copies of your data? There are multiple options over here. Okay, I'll select locally redundant storage. That's the most basic option, but we are not going to go into detail about this different redundant options because that's not the focus of this session. Okay, and now select next. In the advanced settings, some other parameters, I'll keep it default everything except for this. I'll enable hierarchical namespace. Basically, when you enable hierarchical namespace, you get a folder like structure folder, subfolders, files you can create, similar to your operating systems folders, subfolders, right? So I'll create this, enable this, and this will also enable my Gen 2 account, second generation account for my data lake. So I'll just select this. Rest I'll just keep it default. Networking again default, data protection default. I think this is okay. Encryption also default, tags also default, and then review and create. It is running a quick validation. See, I'm not going into a lot of detail about this data lake because our focus of this session is data factory, and we're just creating a data lake because we need a data lake for our data factory. We are going to create some scenarios wherein we are going to use data lake account, right? For which I'm just creating a storage account. So don't worry if you do not understand a lot of these options that I'm selecting. Just go with the flow, select the same options, create a storage account, and that should be sufficient for you. Oh, looks like there are some errors. Let's see the error details. Oh, is all storage account name is already taken. Okay, let's select a different storage account name. Data Lake Gen 2 Ahmed. Okay, let's select ADF workshop ADLS Gen 2. Okay, let's see if this is available. Right, cool. The create button is enabled. So let's go and create it. All right, it's going to take a few minutes, probably a minute or two, to create this data lake storage account Gen 2. Okay. All right, so the deployment is complete. Now let's click on go to resource to have a quick overview about this storage account. So this is how our storage account looks like. In the overview tab, you get some basic information about whatever properties you selected in the wizard. We can skip that. The most important part is the storage browser. This is the most important part. So over here, so basically you have four options. You have block containers, you have file shares, queues, and tables. Okay, we are going to focus only on blob containers. This is where we are going to store our data, right? Container. So this is where you can create a container. Okay, let's say I create demo container. Okay, and click on create. All right, so my demo container is created. Inside a demo container, now I can add as many directories as possible. So I'll say directory one. Okay, and then in I can inside this directory again I can add another subdirectory one, and I can also upload a file over here, anything from my local as well. Okay, but then we are going to do it via our data factory service, right? Via our pipeline, we are going to load data into this uh, data factory service. Sorry, into this container. Okay, so basically, I just wanted to show you that the blob containers is where we are going to focus most of the time in our using our data factory service, and then you can create as many containers as you want or as many folder structure as you want. Okay, I'm going to delete this folders, and then of course it is going to delete its subdirectories as well. Okay, so it has deleted, so I only have this one container, demo container, right now with me. Okay, and I can create as many containers as I want. That's okay. All right. So for file shares, queues, and tables, I think we can ignore it for now because that's not going to be the focus of our data factory course, right? So we can ignore all the other one. The only one we need to focus on is blob containers. All right. Thank you so much. All right. So now let's create a Azure SQL database. For this, again, in the search icon, I'm going to select SQL databases, and then you get to see this first prompt and click on create, and then again a simple wizard. Okay. Now project details, subscription, I'll keep it to default one. So resource group is ADF RG. Database name is ADF course SQL DB. Let's see if this is available. This looks like it's available. Server. I don't have an existing SQL server, so let's create a SQL server. So I'll say ADF course SQL server. And let me see if this is available. Yes, it is. Location is East US. That's fine. Authentication is SQL authentication. I'll keep. So basically, a username, you can select a username and password of your choice. Okay. And then click OK. So we have created a new server. Okay. And inside this server, this database will be created. Elastic pool, no workload environment. I'll select development, compute the storage. Okay. Let's select a different region. Okay. Looks like there is some issue in this region, East US. So let's create a new server, ADF course SQL server. Let's select a different region, West US 2, and then I think my authentication is going to remain the same. Oops. All right, so now let's select the configuration. So there are multiple options available. I'm going to select the most basic one, that is the DTU based purchase. Under DTU based purchasing model, it's the basic. Okay, and then again the database size, I don't need 2 GB. I probably need, something like this. I don't know if it makes any difference to the cost. That's fine. I'll probably keep it 2 GB, and this is my estimated monthly cost, 407 INR. I'm going to click on apply, and then storage redundancy. I'm going to select locally redundant storage, and networking, everything default, security, everything default, additional setting, also everything default. And then let's jump to review plus create. Now it will run a quick validation. Okay, and then let's click on create. So this will create a new server, SQL server, as well as a new database for me. Okay. All right. So our database has been created. Let's click on go to resource. Okay. So this is how it's going to look like. So before we even jump into and query our database and create tables for this, there is one setting that you have to do, which is set server firewall. So click on set server firewall. And then basically what you have to do is that you have to enable access for your IP address. Okay. So for that, what you have to do is that selected networks, and then under firewall rules, click add firewall all access. Either you could select add your client IP over here and it will add your client IP, but then this is much better this way of adding a customer firewall rule. 0.0.0 and 255.255.255.255. So basically, I'm creating a rule that will allow access from any IP address. Like this is your universal IP address, the range, right? Start and end IP address. So no matter what IP address you belong to, you will be able to access. This is of course not recommended for your production or your organization setting, but then for this demo purpose, for this course exploration purpose, I think this is what we could do. Else you could probably select this one and this will only add your client IP address. Okay, and then click on save. So now after adding this firewall rule, I can access my database. I go back to my database and this is where I'm going to spend my time. It is query editor. Now in query editor, remember when we created the SQL server, we gave a username password. This is the same username password. So I'm going to click on OK. Oh wait, it failed. Let's try again. Okay, it's successful. So this is how your database looks like. This is the tables. It's empty right now. This is the views and this is the stored procedures. It's all empty because it's a blank database that we create, but then you can write your query, anything over here the way you want it. Okay. All right, this is what I wanted to cover about creating a SQL database. So far, basically, we've created a data factory service, we've created a data lake storage account, and we've now created a SQL database. Okay, we require this SQL database and data lake storage account for our data factory pipelines, which is why we created it. And that is the reason I did not go into a lot of detail about what is data lake storage and what is Azure SQL database, because we just need this as a source and destination for our data factory, right? And because the focus of this session of this course is data factory, which is why we are going to spend a lot of time on data factory. Okay. All right. See you in the next session. Thank you. All right, welcome back. So now let's try to create our first pipeline. Okay, this is going to be a very simple pipeline, something like a hello world pipeline. Okay, now the task that we are going to achieve in this pipeline is to copy a data from our Azure Data Lake storage account, which is our source, and our destination is going to be our SQL database. Okay, so we're just going to create a sample data in our data lake storage account, and using a pipeline we are going to read the data and paste it or load it into our SQL database. Okay, so before we even start creating this pipeline, let's first create our source data. Let us just create some dummy data in our data lake storage account. Okay, so for that I will go to my storage account. So I will click OK. and my storage account is like I could see over here the most recent storage account, or I could click on the storage accounts and then I'll see all the storage accounts. So this is the one which I had created, right? So over here I'll go to storage browser under blob containers. This is my demo container which I created, right? So over here, I'm going to create some dummy data. Okay. Now on my local drive, okay, on my C drive, I've created a file, a CSV file called as EMP. Okay, it's a very simple CSV file which has few columns and few records. Let me show you this file. Now, when I open this file, this is how it's look like. So just four columns: employee ID, employee name, salary, department ID, and just four dummy records, right? And it's a comma separated file, which is why it's a CSV file. So I've just saved this as emp.csv over here. Now let's load this file. Okay, now this is my Azure portal, and I'm just going to click on upload. Now remember, I'm inside my demo container. Okay, I'm just going to click on upload and just browse for the file. Just browse for my file. So it is going to ask me for the location. So I'm going to select this file from my C drive. You can select whatever path you have created this file, and then I'll just click on upload. Okay, and this is how I have successfully uploaded my data into a data lake storage account gen 2. Okay, now my source is ready. Employee.csv, emp.csv is ready. Let's also create an empty table in our SQL server or SQL database. Okay, for that I will go to my SQL databases. Okay, and I'll select this database, go to query editor and click OK. I'll just enter the username password. Okay, so now after entering the username password, I'm going to create a table EMP with columns as EMP ID and EMP name, varchar 100, and salary, let's say int, or let's say float, and then department ID as int. Okay, typical create table syntax, and I'll run it. Okay, so my EMP table has completed. Let's see if I refresh this under tables, I should see a EMP table. Okay, all right. So my basically source and destination I've just created. In my source, I've loaded a file with dummy records, four records. In my destination, I've created an empty table. So let's create a pipeline to copy the data from source to destination, for which I will go to my Data Factory Studio, and this is my Data Factory Studio, and I'll click on New Pipeline. Okay, and now in New Pipeline, I have to select a activity which is going to copy this data, which is going to perform this task. Okay, now I have a lot of options. As you can see, I have a lot of options over here, but the activity which I want to select is copy data. This is by far the most popular activity in Data Factory, right? Copy data activity, and there are high chances that every pipeline will have at least one copy data activity. So in this copy data activity, just drag and drop it over here. If you just select this, okay, just select this, and you'll see a bunch of settings over here. General, just give a name, copy data from ADLS to SQL DB. Okay, rest I'll just leave it. Source, this is important. All right, before we proceed, let's understand quickly what are linked services and what are data sets. Okay, let's assume this scenario. You have a data factory pipeline, okay, and you want to read the data from this employee table. Okay, let's say there's a table sitting inside a SQL server database. Okay, it can be cloud, on premise, it doesn't matter. Okay, you have to read the table, the data from this table, or just access this table, EMP table, which is sitting in a database. Okay, now for you to access this table, first you have to establish a connection to this database, right? Without establishing a connection to this database, you cannot access the table because this table is sitting inside the database, right? So you have to enter the server name in where the database exists, the username, password, authentication you have to provide, and access the database, right? Once you access the database, then you can access then you can access the uh, table, right? Then you can access the table inside which is sitting inside the SQL database, right? And so this establishing a connection with the database or with the server is called a link service, right? So basically when you establish a connection to a server and a database, that's a link service. That's just establishing a connection. And when you connect to this table, which is nothing but the object within your database, right? That's a data set. So this becomes a data set. Employee EMP table becomes a data set, and this SQL database becomes your link service. So basically in Data Factory, you're going to create a link service, right? And this link service will connect to the database. This dotted line shows that this link service points to this database. And using this link service, you are going to create a data set which points to the EMP table, right? I mean, you cannot create a data set without a link service. How can you create a data set without establishing a connection to the server, right? So you first creating a link service is the first step, because that's how you establish a connection to this server or database, and then use that link service. And we are going to see that in just a few moments, that when we create a data set, we use a link service. Without a link service, you cannot create a data set. So we use this link service to connect to whatever table or whatever thing you want to connect inside this database, because this link service points to this database. So any object within this database, if you want to access, you have to use this link service. And the objects within this database is called a data set. It can be a table, it can be stored procedure, whatever. So I want to, let's say, access this EMP table. That becomes my data set. In Data Factory terminology, this is my data set, right? My EMP table is my data set. If there is a department table, there will be another data set. One data set can point to one object, only one object. That's a thumb rule. One data set can only point to one object. So if there are 10 tables, then you will which you want to read, then you may have to create 10 different data sets. There is of course a different concept of parameterization, wherein you can have a single data set with parameters and all that stuff. But then simplistically speaking, one data set points to one object within a database. Clear? So that's a data set for you. And link service is establishing a connection. Okay, now this is about database. If we talk about file system, then let's say this is your file system, file server, let's say. Okay, server or file path. Okay, no, let's say this is your file server and this is the file path, the folder path, let's say some folder path, root level folder path. Okay, root folder path, any root for it can be any root folder path. Okay, so and this is your file then, right? So your file becomes a data set, and the file server or the whatever folder path, that becomes your link service. So you have to create a link service that points to the particular file server, that points to a particular folder. And inside the folder, if you have 10 different files, you have to create 10 different data sets if you want to read the data from all the 10 files, right? So one file is one data set. Just understand this situation scenario very clearly, that link service is just establishing a connection to your server, to your files path, to your database, and any object within the database, any object within the file server, like subfolders, files, those are all data set in Data Factory terminology. Okay, cool. Let's proceed. Let's configure the source as well. Now, what is our source? Our source is our data lake storage account, right? The container in data lake storage account. So it is asking you for a source data set. So I'm going to select a new, and these data sets are reusable. Like if I want to reuse this employee.csv into some other pipeline, I can do that as well. It's reusable across all the pipelines. So I'll quickly select new. Now, what is my data set type? It is Azure Data Lake Gen 2. right? Because my data set is my Gen 2 account. So now in Data Factory, you get a whole bunch of options to create a data set from, right? There are plenty of options, hundreds of different options. You can create a data set from a S3, from blob storage, from Databricks, from DB2, from SQL Server, whatnot, Oracle, everything, right? Snowflake, Salesforce. So you just have to select the type of your data set. Like in our case, it is a data lake account, right? If my, let's say, if I want to create a data set for a SQL server, then I would be selecting SQL server over here, right? If I want to, if my source was an SQL server, but over here it's a Azure Data Lake Gen 2. That's the type of data set. Okay, I'll select this Gen 2 and I'll click on continue. Now, what is the format of this data that we are trying to read in the source, right? It's a CSV file. Now, these are the available options that you have in Data Factory to read. So mine is a CSV format. So I'll select the CSV. I'll click on continue. Okay. Now let's give a name to this employee.csv. Okay. Employee underscore CSV underscore ADLS. Now this will tell me that this is a employee EMP CSV file in a ADLS account, stored in a ADLS, right? That's the name of it. Now link service. Now so far we've just specified what is the type of our data set. We've specified that our data set is a Azure Data Lake storage account, of a data present in a Azure Data Lake storage account, right? That's what we've specified. But then we have to establish a connection to our ADLS account, right? Only when we establish a connection to our ADLS account, that's when we would be able to read the data from our ADLS account. So establishing a connection is called linked service, creating a linked service. In Data Factory terminology, it's called a linked service. And a link service is nothing but establishing a connection to your server. It can be source, it can be destination, it doesn't matter. It's just establishing a connection. Okay. And link service are, of course, reusable across all pipelines and all data sets. Okay. Now, I'll say new link service. Name, I'll just keep it as the default one. Integration runtime, I'll just keep it default. Auto resolve integration runtime. I'll come to this at a later point. Authentication type is account key or service principal. These are different ways in which you could authenticate yourself to your data lake account. I'll select account key for now. That's the simplest option. Account selection method. Now we have to select our data lake account, right? So subscription, pay as you go, and then in drop down, this is the storage account that it is giving me, right? Now test connection to the link service. So we've specified all the details. We've specified the account key option, authentication method. We've specified the storage account name. Let's test our connection. Let's see if it works. And you see connection successful and create a connection. Okay. So basically we have created a link service. So that means we have established a connection to our ADLS account. Now within that data lake account, where is our file? Just we have to browse. You see, we created this container, demo container on the storage browser on the block containers. We created this container, demo container, and we are seeing the same container over here, right? Because we are browsing inside the data lake storage account. So let's click on this container, and this is our file. So let's click on this. Click on OK. Okay, so we've selected our file which we want to copy. We also specified that first row is a header. Okay, and then import the schema. Like, what is the schema of the file? Let's ask them to import it from the file itself. Okay, and click on OK. Cool. So we have configured our source part of our copy data activity. A quick summary. What did we do in the source? We first created a data set. Okay, and inside a data set, we created a linked service. Okay, and a link service is used to establish a connection to a particular server. Okay, and a data set is nothing but an object within that particular server. So if you see our data set, I can open this data set as well. Okay, source data set, I'll just click on open. So if you see in this data set, it is using this link service. and this data set points to employee.csv file. Okay, that's what this database points to. Data set. In the schema, if you see, this is the schema of the file which it has imported. So this data set is specific to employee.csv file. Okay, so at any point, if we want to access a particular, let's say a file or a table, any object, any data object, right? We have to create a data set, and to create a data set, we need a link service, because it is only a link service that will help you establish a connection to the particular server. Okay, I hope this is clear. I know it might be a little confusing in the beginning, but trust me, once you practice it with more examples, it will be more clear. And in our entire workshop, we are going to have plenty of examples. Okay. So all right. So some more in this data set, some more options that you're getting. For example, what is a column delimiter, row delimiter? I think I'll keep it default because this is all applicable to me. I'll keep it default. And in my pipeline under source, you see this is all default. I think you don't need to change anything over here, right? So we've successfully configured our source part. Sync is your destination. In Data Factory, your destination is called as sync. Okay, just remember, whenever you see word sync in Data Factory, that means it is your destination. It is your target. Okay. Again, similar to source, we have to configure our sync data set as well. Now, what is our sync data set? Just take a pause and see and think, what is our target data set? It's going to be our table, EMP table that we created in our SQL database, right? This EMP table, this is our target. So we have to create a data set for this EMP table, a data set which points to this EMP table. So I'll again click on new, and now this time what is going to be the type of my data set? Okay, think about it. This time it is going to be my SQL database. SQL data, not SQL Server. It's Azure SQL Database that we created, right? So this time it is going to be my Azure SQL Database, because that's what is the type of my EMP, right? I cannot select Azure Data Lake because my EMP table is inside my Azure SQL Database, not inside my Azure Data Lake account, which is why I'm going to select Azure SQL Database as the type of my data set. Okay, click on continue. Now, if you see, it did not ask us for the file format, which it had asked us during our source environment, source dataset configuration. Now, let's give a name to this dataset. Employee table SQL DB. Okay, you can give any name. This is what I give. Now, again, it is going to ask you for a linked service. Now, we've just specified that our data set is of the type called as Azure SQL Database. We've just specified it. But then which Azure SQL database, like the connection, how do we establish a connection to that Azure SQL database via link service? So click on it, click on new, Azure, I'll keep it default, Azure SQL database, integration runtime, again, it's default. Azure subscription, let's select the subscription, server name. Now if you see, when I select the subscription, it is giving me this SQL server name, and this is the server name which we had created when we created the SQL data, Azure SQL database, right? So now I select this server name, and inside this server, now it is giving me this database name. If you see, this is my database name, ADF course SQL DB. ADF course SQL DB, right? This is my database name. So it's giving me this database name. So I select this database. Now authentication, user, I say server admin, password, welcome @1 2. Okay, and then click on test connection. Connection successful. So we basically successfully established a connection. Create. So we have created a link service. So that means we've established a connection to our database. Okay. I'll click on close. And now since we have established a successful connection, now we can browse the tables. We just have one table right now created, but then we can still browse any table that in that particular database, right? So I'll select this table, import schema again from the connection itself, and click on OK. Cool. So right now we have also configured our sink, which is our destination, and which is our EMP table from in our SQL Azure SQL database. Wonderful. And then now you get multiple options over here in the sink section, like right view. Do you want to insert it? Do you want to upsert it? Do you want to call a stored procedures and everything, right? We just go with simple as an insert option over here. And then of course you have pre-copy script. Like for example, every time you copy, let's say you want to truncate the table. I'm just giving an example. So you can write a truncate statement, your typical SQL statement, truncate table EMP, and write it over here. And this is going to be executed before it copies or before it loads a single record. Before it loads any record, it is going to first execute this particular statement, truncate table EMP, right? You can write any statement. You can write update EMP as well and set something, whatever. I mean, your any statement, any SQL script that you write over here is going to be executed before it copies a single record into into your sync table. Okay. So that's what it's going to do in the pre-copy script. I'm going to keep it blank because I don't want to execute anything. And if you see, there's a table option. There's also auto create table option over here, right? So I have created a blank table right now, but then if you want, if you don't want to do it, if you select this auto create option, it is going to create a table for you. Okay, it is going to create a table for you. But then in our case, we just select it as none because we already have the table created. Okay. All right. So far, so good. I think the sync data set is created. Let's quickly check the data set as well. Okay. I'll click on open. If you see, this is what it looks like. The schema. This is your table schema. Int, varchar, float, int. The data type. Coming back to pipeline. Now we've configured our source. We've configured our sync. Now is a mapping part. Like let's say in the source you have 50 fields, okay, and in your destination you only have 5 fields. Then you have to map the fields field by field, from source to destination. That's what this mapping section looks like. In our case, the source and destination schema exactly matches, which is why we don't have any problem. But then if you want to still map it by column by column, let's say the field names are different. Okay, it is going to automatically by default map based on the field name. If it finds a matching field name in the source and a matching field name in the target, it is going to map it for you. And because in our case the field name is also exactly the same in the source and destination, like our data lake account and our SQL database, the field name is exactly same, so we don't have to manually do it. But in case if you want to do it manually, then just click on import schema and then just select your fields. Like in source, you may want to select employee name, and over here, if let's say there is something else, then you can select that over here, right? So that way you can manually map the fields from source to destination. Okay. Settings, it's mostly default. Okay. So I'll just keep it default. All right. All right. So I think we have configured our pipeline, and now it's time to save our pipeline, save our work that we've done, right? And remember, this is a web interface. This is we are working on cloud, directly on cloud. This is not local software that we're installing, right? That we had installed. So we cannot save anything. There is no save button as such, but there is something called as publish button. So when you publish something, it publishes it on the server, on the cloud, on your data factory service on cloud. It will publish it, right? And it of course gets saved. So next time when you open this anywhere, from any computer, any laptop, since it is all being saved on cloud, you can access it from anywhere. Okay. So it is publishing it and publishing completed. That means now your content is saved on the cloud environment of data factory. All right, now it's time to run. It's show time. Okay. Now let's click on add trigger and I'll say trigger now because that's what I want to just trigger it once. I don't want to schedule this pipeline. Okay. And I'll say trigger now and I'll click on OK. Now the pipeline is running. Now, how do we see our pipeline? Whether it's failed, successful, whatever. You go into this monitoring section on the left hand side. If you're following my cursor, go into the monitoring section and this is where you are going to see your pipeline. Okay, keep hitting refresh and then you're going to see the status of it. And if you see pipeline succeeded, You get a notification over here as pipeline succeeded. Um, and if you see you over here also, you see it succeeded. So the pipeline has succeeded, which is good. Pipeline has succeeded. So let's see if it has actually copied any data to our EMP table. Okay. I'll say select star from EMP. I'm inside my Azure SQL database now. I'll say select star from EMP. I'll select it and run it. Wow, it has copied all the four records, right? In our file, we saw we had four records in our files, and now in the destination, we have it has copied all the four records. Wonderful. So congratulations. This is your first pipeline in Data Factory. This is our hello world sort of pipeline in Data Factory, right? A very simple pipeline, but a very important, but it also explored some very important concepts, right? Like link service and data set. Wonderful. So this concludes our session of copying the data from Azure SQL database to Azure Data Lake. Okay. Sorry, it's Azure Data Lake to Azure SQL database, right? So just last few closing points. Okay, closing points. Um, First thing, we copied from a Azure source to a Azure destination. Keep that in mind. We copied from a Azure source to Azure destination. Our source was also Azure, our destination was also Azure. Okay, that's one scenario. Okay, and next thing is we created link services, right? And if you see, if you go under the manage tab over here, there is an option called as link services, and this is where you're going to see your link services. I told you this is your admin option. The manage but section is your admin panel. So this is where you see all your link services created under link services option. If you click on link service, you can change this server name and whatever. You can connect it to different server and all that stuff, right? And so this is a link service and this is reusable. Now I can use this link service any pipeline in this data factory service. In any pipeline I want, I could use this link service, right? So this is reusable. So you just create link service once and you can use it anywhere across. So now next time if I want to create a pipeline which is going to access any object inside my SQL database or any object inside my data lake storage account, I don't need to create a separate link service because I have already created a link service and I can just reuse it. Okay, the same link service. Similarly, we also created some data sets, if I'm not wrong, right? If you see this data set, EMP CSV ADLS, EMP table ADLS, under author panel, you see these data sets are also now saved. These are also reusable. Now I can create another pipeline if I want to access the same table and same file. I can reuse this data set, right? So that's a quick summary I wanted to share with you, that you can reuse your link services and you can reuse your data sets across multiple pipelines, across all the pipelines in your data factory service. Okay, and then another important point is that our source was Azure and our destination was also Azure. Okay, all right, thank you so much, and see you in the next session. Hi, welcome back. So in this session, we are going to see what are self-hosted integration runtime. Now, before we deep dive into self-hosted, let's understand a situation, or let's try to understand a scenario. Let's say if you want to connect from Azure Data Factory to a on-premise source system or destination. It could be a flat file on on-premise. It could be a database, Oracle, SQL Server, whatever. If you want to connect from a data factory to on-premise environment, in that situation, you need self-hosted integration runtime. You need to configure a self-hosted integration runtime. It's just a one-time activity, one-time configuration activity, and then you can, of course, reuse it throughout the project. Okay. So now on the screen, if you see, I've just, pictorially, I've tried to explain how a self-hosted integration runtime works. Now, this is your data factory. Okay, this is your Azure data factory sitting on cloud, right? Now, from cloud, you need to access either SQL Server sitting on machine 1, either Oracle sitting on machine 2, or either a flat file sitting on machine 3. This is just an example. You can access any system on your on-premise environment. Okay. Now, if you want to access these machines, this particular databases or flat file system, in that case, you need to install a self-hosted integration runtime. So if you see, I've installed self-hosted integration runtime. It's basically a piece of software that you need to install, and we're going to see that in just a moment. So you have to install this piece of software on a particular machine, any centralized machine, any machine which has access to all this source system. Okay. Now you could also install it on this particular machine as well. Nobody's going to stop you, and it will work fine as well. You can install it on this particular machine where your SQL server is installed. You can install it over there or over here or over here. Okay, that's absolutely fine. But as a best practice, what Microsoft recommend is that install it on a dedicated machine, install it on a separate machine which is dedicated to the self-hosted IR, so that in future, if you want to update the software or if you want to run updates and all that maintenance activities, in that case, your source systems won't get impacted, right? So, which is why, as a best practice, I have installed this on a dedicated machine, machine 4 in that case, and this machine now has access to all these three machines, right? So this acts as a gateway for us. This machine acts as a gateway, or the self-hosted IR acts as a gateway for our data factory pipeline to communicate with SQL Server, to Oracle, to Flatfile, anything, right? So that's basically the concept of self-hosted integration runtime. It is a piece of software that you have to install on a centralized machine which has access to all your source system. Now, it may also happen that, let's say, this particular machine is in a separate network, and this machine 4 doesn't have access to machine 3. In that case, what I would do is that I would install this self-hosted IR on a separate machine, and then that machine I can connect to my flat file system, and then of course my data factory will be able to, I'll configure my data factory so that it will connect to the self-hosted IR on machine 5, and so that I can communicate to the machine 3 file system, right? So you can install, of course, multiple self-hosted IR on multiple machines if there are some network restrictions or security restrictions in place, right? That's one scenario. But then the simplest scenario is that install it on a location where you can access multiple source systems from that location. All right, cool. So now let's jump into our practical session. So let's explore, or let's find out, where do you install this self-hosted, or how do you configure the self-hosted IR? Okay. Now I'm inside my data factory. Okay. This is my data factory. I'm going to click cancel. I was trying something. So to install integration runtime, what you have to do is that go to integration runtime under manage. Okay, go to integration runtime option over here. I'm going to delete this integration runtime. Okay, go to the integration runtime section under manage option and click on new integration runtime. Now, when you click on new, you get an option of Azure and self-hosted. I'm going to click on this option. Okay, continue. And now I'm going to select a self-hosted over here. So you have an Azure integration runtime, which is a default integration runtime. Now that's something which is this. If you see over here, this is something which is default, which is by default provided to you by Data Factory when you create a Data Factory. And you can use this integration runtime when you want to connect from to a Azure object. It could be source, it could be destination, it doesn't matter. But when you want to connect to a Azure object, or a Azure service, let's say Azure SQL Database, Azure Data Lake, or whatever, any other Azure service, you can use this default integration runtime. If you're following my cursor, this is the default integration runtime. And in the eh, previous session, we saw that we copied data from a Azure source to a Azure destination, right? Our source was Azure Data Lake and our destination was Azure SQL Database. In that case, we have had used this default integration runtime. That's what we'd use. We didn't use a self-hosted integration runtime. We will only use self-hosted integration runtime when we want to connect to on-premise data object. Okay. So let's select self-hosted over here, click on continue. I'm gonna give it a name, self-hosted, oops, self-hosted IR, and click on create. Okay. So now it gives you two options to set up your self-hosted IR. Okay, let's explore the manual setup option. This is more interesting, I think. So click on this link, download and install IR. Okay, now it's going to redirect you to a Microsoft link, of course, and then just download this software. Okay, select the latest version over here. I think this is the latest version. Sorry, 5.39. Yeah, select the latest version over here and click on download, and it's gonna be a software around 800 900 MB, something like that. Okay, just download this software. Okay, the exe file. Now I have already downloaded this software. Okay, and you see this is the software which I have downloaded. Now let's install this. This is a typical installation process that you follow. Just double click on it and click next, 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 and then just install this piece of software. That's what I'm going to do. And next, I accept. Next, this is the installation location. Next, and install. Okay, it's going to take a minute or two, okay, to install it. So let's wait for a minute or two and then come back once it completes the install. All right, so now I have installed the integration runtime, and I have opened it. You can open it, go to the start window and just search for integration runtime, and it will open up. It will look something like this. Okay, now the next step, it is asking us to register our integration runtime. Okay, for that we have to go back to our data factory. Okay, and in the data factory, uh, if you see, we've completed step one, right? With download and install integration and time. Now it's the step two, which is registering our integration and time. Okay, so for that you need to copy the some this authentication key. You know, any one of the either key one or key two, whatever you want. You just copy the key one or key two. Okay, I'll just click over here, copy to clipboard. Okay, and it has copied, and then just go and paste it over here. Just paste your key which you've copied, paste it over here, and then click on register. All right, cool. So now if you see our integration runtime, it has accepted our key, and then I'm going to click on finish. And now basically what it is doing is that it is connecting our integration runtime to our data factory service, right? It is connecting the data factory service with our integration runtime over here. That's what it's doing. So quick summary, I have installed this integration runtime on my local machine right now. Okay, for this workshop purpose, I have installed it on my local machine, and because I want to show you how can I access files, a flat file on my local machine, right? Which is why I've installed it on my local machine. You can access any object in maybe a database on your local machine, maybe a flat file on your local machine, anything, whatever you want to access, right? All right, so it looks like it has been registered successfully, and I'm going to click on close, and I'm going to click on close over here as well. Now, if you see, there's one option that got added over which is self-hosted IR, and the status is running. Okay, the status is running. If you see, that's cool. That's what I wanted. So far, we've configured the self-hosted IR. Okay, and it's a one-time activity. As I said, it's a one-time activity. But we haven't yet connected to any object in on my local, right, on my laptop. So I'll show you an object over here. Now, if I go to my C drive and if I go to self-hosted IR demo, this is a file that I have created. Okay, it's a simple file, emp.csv. I'll just show you emp.csv. Actually, we can see it over here. Just four columns, comma delimited, four columns and four records, right? A very simple file, just for a demo purpose I've created. Now, from my data factory, I want to access this file. Okay, this emp.csv file. Okay, how do I do that? For that, first thing first thing is this is the folder location. Okay, now I have to right click this folder. Okay, go to properties, and under sharing, it's already shared over here, but then over sharing you have to click on share. and make sure you have access to this particular folder. I mean, make sure your user account from which you have logged into this to your laptop, make sure that user account is added over here. Okay, and just click on share. Okay, and then this is the path that we require. I'm just going to copy this path. Okay, and I'm going to go to my data factory. Now, I'll go to my link service. Now, to connect to my emp.csv file, I have to first create a link service, right? We've seen this before, that to establish a new connection for the first time, we have to create a link service. That's what link service does, to establish a connection. So I'm going to click on new, and what is my connection? What do I want to connect to? A file, right? So I'm going to see if there is a connector present for it. Oh, there is a connector called as file system. Okay, I'm going to click on continue. Now over here in my integration runtime, I'm going to select self-hosted IR. This is very, very important. This is the most important part, where you have to select your self-hosted IR in the integration runtime. And in the host section, I'm going to paste the path which I had copied. Okay, which I had copied from my folder location. I have to paste it over here. And username is nothing but the user through which you have logged into your laptop. It's the same user, right? Just enter the username and enter the password. Okay, I'm going to do the same and click on test connection, and just give it a moment until it checks. Okay, the connection failed. Value of the property is invalid. Access to this desktop. This is my desktop name. Okay, to desktop is denied. Okay, let's see. I think there is one step which we missed. Okay, and that one step is that go to your command prompt. Okay, go to your command prompt. Go to this location. Okay, uh, okay. I'm gonna go to my, okay, and go to cd space. Oops, cd space this location. So C program files, Microsoft integration runtime 5.0 share. This is a location. This is basically the location where you have installed your integration runtime. Okay. So go to this location. Okay. Now you're in this location. In this location, we have to execute a command. Okay. And the command is enable local machine access. Okay, this is a exe file which we have to execute, and we have to supply parameter enable local machine access. Basically, this is a security setting that we have to enable. Okay, and click enter, and let's give it a moment. All right, so it completed that setting. Okay, and there is one more command that we have to execute, disable local folder path validation. Okay, and enter. Just make sure you execute this command as is. Hit pause, copy this. It's very simple. Dmg cmd.exe and hyphen space hyphen enable local machine access, and same dmg cmd.exe space hyphen disable local folder path validation. Okay. Make sure you copy this as is without any mistake, typo error. All right, so now the command has executed successfully. So now let's go back to our data factory and test connection again. Okay, and I'm going to click on test connection again, and let's see if this time it's able to succeed. I hope it will succeed. Cool. So connection successful, right? And let's create. So now with this link service, we've basically established a connection to our local file system. Remember, it's just a file system, not a file, emp.csv. We haven't yet accessed the emp.csv because the link service, if you see, is only up to this location, this folder location, right? So cool. So using the self-hosted IR, we were able to establish a connection to our local file system. And now let's go and create a simple pipeline. Okay. And I'm going to create a new pipeline over here. Click on new pipeline, and I'm going to drag a copy activity. Okay. And I'm going to go to my source option inside copy activity. Now create a data set. Okay. How do you create a data set? Okay. Click on new, and I'm going to select file system again. Over here, click on continue. What is my file? It's a CSV file, right? I'm going to click on continue. I'm going to say on-prem EMP CSV. Okay. And link service. Now in the drop down, it is going to prompt you this link service file server one, which we just created. Okay. So just select that link service. And if you see that it has already populated this file path for you, right? Now all you have to do is just click on this browse button and just select the file which you want. I mean, there can be subfolders as well which you could select. I'll just select this file emp.csv and click on OK. I'll say first row as header and I'll click on OK. Okay, so great. This is how we created our data set. Now our data set is basically points to our emp.csv file. Wonderful. Now let's add a sink to it. Okay, what is the sink? Let's say we copy this to our data lake. That's the simplest one, right? Let's say we copy it to our data lake. So I'm going to click on new. I'm going to click on, okay, let's say we copy it to a SQL database, not a data lake, SQL database, right? So we click on Azure SQL database. I'm going to give a name EMP CSV table. Okay, and link service. Now, if you see, it has given me this prompt in the drop down of the Azure SQL database one, a link server which we created in the previous session, if you remember, right? So basically, a link service can be reused across multiple pipelines. That's what we discussed in the previous session, right? So uh, I can reuse the same link service. It's just that the data set changes now, right? So the same link service I can use because the link service points to my database, not to my table. Link service points to my database. And now within the database, I can have, of course, multiple tables. So I can create multiple data sets for each table, right? Okay, so now let's select the table. Now, see, this table doesn't exist. This says AMP CSV file, which we are importing. I want to create a new table. Okay, so there is a hack to do that. I'm going to select any existing table right now. Okay, just select any existing table. I'm going to click on OK for now. Let's click on OK. Okay, so it's going to create this data set for us. And I'm going to select auto create the table option. I'm going to select auto create over here, right? I'm going to select auto create table and I'm going to open this data set now. So when I open this data set, I'm going to select this checkbox as enter manually. And over here, I'm going to give a name as DBOCSV, EMP underscore CSV. This is the new table name which I want to give, right? So that's a small hack that I'm doing. And I'm going to click on publish all. And basically it's going to save all my changes. And let's me double check if my pipeline looks correct. I think it looks great. And it is going to auto create the table. So basically it's going to create a new table. Okay, let's go to our SQL database in the meantime. Let's logging. All right, so EMP underscore CSV doesn't exist, right? So let's run this and see if it's able to create it. Okay, I'm going to click on add trigger and click on trigger now. Okay, and now let's go to the monitoring section over here to monitor our pipeline. See the status is in progress and let's run it. Let's refresh it. Okay, the pipeline completed successfully, right? Let's go to our SQL database and let's see if it has created a table employee EMP underscore CSV. Great, it has created this table. If you see, so let's run a query. Select star from EMP underscore CSV. Okay, and let's run it. It should have 4 records. Wonderful. Awesome. So basically, we have successfully copied the data from our on-premise flat file emp.csv, that was our source, onto our destination, which was Azure SQL database. We also created a new table, Azure SQL database, right? And we were able to do that with the help of self-hosted integration runtime. That's what we saw in this session. Okay. Hi there, welcome back. So far, we've seen the copy activity, right? We've seen how do you copy the data from a source to a destination, and activity is the most popular activity in the entire data factory. Okay, but then there are a lot of other activities as well which you can use for transforming your data. You know, these are called transform activity, wherein you can perform some transformations with your data. Okay, so in this session, we are going to see the lookup activity. You can find lookup under general. You can find a lookup activity over there, and there are a lot of other transformation activities in Data Factory. And in this workshop, we're going to see a few of those transformation activities. Okay, now let's create a new pipeline. And in this pipeline, let's drag our lookup activity under general. Let's drag lookup. Where is lookup? Over here. So let's drag the lookup activity. So if you see in lookup, you again have some settings which you have to configure, similar to our copy activity. Okay. Now what is lookup? Basically, you will use lookup activity whenever you want to read the data. Okay, read the contents of a particular data set. For example, if you have a data set pointing to a table, and if you want to read the contents of the table, or if you want to query the table, that's when you would use a lookup activity. Similarly, if you have a data set that points to a file, a flat file or whatever other file, and if you want to read the contents of the file, that's when you would use a lookup activity. So basically, lookup is used to in a way query your data set. Okay, now let's see that in practice. How do you use that? So in the settings, you have to select a data set. Okay. Now when I have some data set that is already created, right? Our CSV file and everything. Let's create a new data set. Okay. And let's first check our SQL database. Click continue. I'll keep the default name and I'll select link services, which is pointing to Azure SQL database. And let's wait for it to see our table. Okay, these are the two tables I have, okay, in my database. Let's select one table, okay, and click on OK. Cool. So now, oops, okay. So now if you see, we have selected the data set as our table, our EMP table. Okay. And of course, there's an option which will return only the first row from this table, which we don't want. We want to return all the data from this table. Okay. So I will deselect this. Now, if I select this table check radio button, it will just select this table. If I select query, then I could write a query over here. Let's select star from emp underscore CSV. Now, if you remember, this data set points to EMP table, right? I've opened this data set. Now this data set points to EMP table. But in my query, I can write any query within the database. Okay, I can write any query like select star from emp underscore csv, because this is also one of the table in my database. Okay, so it doesn't matter what your data set is pointing to. In your query, you could write any query, and this query is going to, the output of this query is going to be returned to you as output of this lookup activity. Okay, so you could write a query. You could also execute a stored procedure. Many a times you would need to execute a stored procedure as part of your pipeline. Okay, that's when you would use a lookup. Just use a lookup, point it to any random table in the database where the stored procedure exists, and then just enter the stored procedure name. Okay, just select. Now I don't have any stored procedure created, which is why it's not showing anything, but then just enter the stored procedure, and then it is going to return whatever the output the stored procedure is going to return. It is going to return it for you, and you can read it in the next activities. We're going to see that as well at a later point. Okay, cool. So let's select the basic option first, table. So if I select the basic option and if I run this, it should show us, all the records of that table, emp table, right? And this time I'm not going to run it in a trigger mode, like trigger now. No, this time I'm going to run it in debug mode. This is different than trigger, right? When you trigger a pipeline, you can see it in the monitor section and everything, but you could also debug your pipeline. Okay, and that's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to click on debug, and it is going to run it over here itself. And I'll show you how do you see the progress. If you see, there is an output tab that comes over here, and then you can see all your activities running over here within the pipeline itself. Now remember, I haven't gone to my monitoring section. Within the pipeline itself, I am able to see my output of the pipeline, and I'll just click on refresh, Cool. It completed, right? Now, how do you see the output? What this pipeline has returned, right? The pipe output of this lookup activity. How do you see that? Now, in the debug option, if you see, there are two arrows over here. This is the input. This is the output. Let's see the input. Input is a JSON script. Okay, input, and over here you'll just see some basic configuration whatever you have performed. In the output, I'll just expand this. Okay, in output you're going to see the output of this lookup, whatever the lookup has returned, and it has, under the value tag, it has returned the four records. Our employee table has four records, and this is the field name, this is the value. It's a key value pair. It's a key value pair that it has returned. Key value pair it has returned. Okay, so that way it has returned, this is the first record, this is the second record, third and fourth, this is the fourth record. Now I can use this output in some other subsequent activities, and I can perform some other transformations, whatever I want to do. Okay. So that's what lookup does. It will just read the contents. It will just query your data set. Okay. Now let's try it in a different way. Let's try running this query. Select star from emp underscore csv. Okay. And let's again debug it. Run it in debug mode. Again in output, I'll just hit refresh. And again, my emp underscore csv also has four records. Okay. So it's again going to show you the four records. Okay. But what I want to show you is that uh, even if whatever the table, the data set is pointing to, it ignores that table and it will just run the query, whatever query you return over there. Okay, it succeeded. Let's go to the output section. And if you see, it has returned the four records. Number one, two, three, four. Four records, right? That's how it has returned. Now let's play with this a little bit. Let's create a data set which points to our flat file. Okay. Now I'm going to use my data lake. I'm going to create a new data set pointing to my data lake storage gen 2. Click continue. It's a CSV file. Click continue. And link service, I already have a link service created. And let's browse to the file location. Okay. This is my container. This is my file, and I'm going to click OK. Okay, first row as header, the checkbox is ticked, and click OK. Okay, so now I have selected a file in my CS in my data lake account. Okay, what should it show? What should it ideally return, the lookup activity? Well, it should ideally return me the contents of that file. Okay, let's go to the file and see what is the contents of that file. This is my data lake account, and let's see the content of the file. Okay, and cool, it has four records: John, Michael, Josh, and Laurie. Okay, and let's go to our data factory and let's run this again in our debug mode, and then see what is the output. Okay, whether it returns these four records: John, Michael, Josh, and Laurie. Okay. Wait, completed already. Okay, three seconds. Wait, let me rerun it. I think this is the previous execution. Cool, it completed. So the output is, you see, four records: John, Michael, Josh, and Laurie. It has returned us four records. Basically, it has read the contents of the file and given us the output, right? This is what lookup does. Very simple activity, but very, very useful and very commonly used activity. Okay. All right, that's it for this one. See you in the next session. Now, the next activity that we're going to see is get metadata activity. So that activity can again be found under general. You see there is get metadata. I'm going to drag it to my existing pipeline. I'm not going to create a new pipeline this time. And I'm just going to join both this activity, just join these activities. And what does get metadata do? I mean, as the name itself tells you, it will return us the metadata of a particular object. Okay. Now, if the object is a table, it is going to return the metadata like the field names, the data type of those fields, and all the metadata of that table, right? If the object is a file or maybe a folder, it is going to return the metadata of that folder, like the child items and all that stuff. Okay, let's see, let's explore that. But basically, it's going to give you only the metadata of it, right? So over here, again, you have a settings option. Again, it's asking for a data set. Okay, so let's create a data set. Let's create a data set for our data lake Gen 2. Okay, click continue. CSV file I've selected, click continue, and link service. Okay, I've selected it. Browse, and I'm gonna select my container. Oh wait, let's see if it allows me. I'm gonna select just my container. Okay, and okay. Now remember, I've just selected my demo container. Okay, inside my demo container, this is the demo container I've selected. Inside the demo container, I have two objects. One is a folder, new directory folder, as you can see, and the other one is emp.csv file. Okay, now let's go back to our data factory, and over here, now I've selected this data set. Okay, I've created this data set, and now you have something called as field list. Okay, this determines, or this tells you what kind of metadata do you want to select, what kind of metadata do you need for that particular data set. Okay, let's select new, and in the drop down, now you have all these different types of metadata. The first one is child items. Now child items will simply tell you, give you all the folders, subfolders, the files inside that particular data set. Okay, let's select the child items, and we can add as many fields as we want. So I'm going to click on new, and I'm going to select exist. Exist is a boolean. It returns true or false. Whether the whatever object this data set is pointing to, whether that object exists or not, it is going to return. Okay. Again, another is item name. It's going to return the name of the item. Okay, and then item type, and then the last one I think is last modified. Oops, last modified. All right. So these are the different metadata that we can retrieve from this data set. Remember, my data set is pointing to a container. It's similar to a folder, right? Container is same as a folder, right? It is not pointing to a file. It is pointing to a folder location. Okay. Now let's run it. Let's run it in debug mode again. I'm going to click on debug, and so if you see in the output section, the first activity is lookup, because that's a sequence I've kept. First is lookup and then metadata. So first lookup gets executed and then the get metadata get executed. Let's see the output over here of get metadata. Okay, and let's maximize this. So if you see, we had selected 4 or 5 fields, right, as metadata fields. So first one was exist. What did it return? True. Yes, because the demo container, it exists over there, right? Which is where it returned true. Item name, demo container, correct? Item type, it's a folder. Our data set points to a folder, right? So which is why the type is folder. Last modified, this is the date which is last modified. Child items. Child items gives us, there are two child items for that particular folder. First one is a file, which is the name is emp.csv, the type is file. The second one is new directory and the type is folder, right? These are the other two child items that this particular folder has, in our data lake account. So this is the metadata that it has received, and it returns it in a key value pair. Okay, and we could of course use this anywhere downstream in our pipeline. Okay, so that's a metadata for a folder location. Okay, now if I let's say create a new data set, again I select SQL database. Let's say my new data set is a table, is a SQL table. Okay, I select my link service and I select a table within my SQL database. Let's say I select EMP table. Okay, and I click on OK. Now this time my data set is a table. Let's see the field list that is available. Okay, now if you see, there are just three metadata field lists that is available. First one is column count, second one is exist, third one is structure. And that makes sense, right? I mean, the metadata for a file or for a folder is different than a metadata for a table, SQL table, right? I mean, that's what Data Factory gives you. this flexibility of selecting your metadata, right? So over here you see different metadata options that it can return. First one is column count. Okay, next is exists. Again, it's a Boolean value, and then structure. Okay, and so let's run this. So whatever data set you select, according to that data type, your metadata field is going to change. Just remember that. It is not universal like one set of metadata for everything, all type of objects. Okay, and it should be completed. It's completed in the get metadata in the output. Just click on it, expand this, and if you see exists is true because the table exists. Structure, this is nothing but a scheme of the table, right? The physical name is EMP ID, the data type, logical type, name, precision scale, whatever. For all the four columns, you get to see these metadata. This is the metadata for all the four columns. So for employee ID, for employee name, salary, department ID, everything you get to see this metadata of the data type and name. And then of course you have column count as well. That's another metadata that you get because we have four columns, which is that's why you get the column count as four over there. All right. So that's the get metadata activity for you. And I just wanted to show you with different types of data set. First one we saw was a folder. The second one we saw was a SQL table. Our data set points to SQL table, and for both the objects, it returned us different type of metadata which was best suitable for that particular object, right? So that's what it's a beauty of get metadata. And again, this is very popular and very useful activity. Okay. All right. Thank you so much and see you in the next session. All right. So in this session, we are going to see a very important activity called as data flow. So this session and the next few sessions, we are going to focus specifically on data flow because that is a very important activity. And so first thing, what is data flow? So far, whatever we activities we've seen and all the other activities that you see on the screen, when you create a pipeline like under general, this batch service, Databricks, Synapse, whatever, all these activities that you see over here, none of those activities are or can be used for row by row transformations. For example, if you want to, let's say, join two tables and apply a filter criteria and update records in a database, none of these activities you can use or are useful for that purpose. So when you want to do row by row transformation, that's when you create a data flow activity. A data flow activity is specifically used for performing row by row transformations. Okay. Now let's create a new pipeline and let's use this data flow. Let's see what this is. So under move and transform, you see a data flow activity. I just drag and drop it in my pipeline. So this is where you perform your data transformations, right? All the data transformation, this is where you perform. Now, what is data flow? When you create a data flow activity or when you run a data flow activity under the hood in the back end, Data Factory will create or Azure will create a Spark cluster for you. Okay. Now, what is Spark? It's okay if you don't know what is Spark because, anyways, it's all hidden from you. I mean, as a developer, you don't have access to the Spark cluster and everything, right? So it's all hidden for you. But in a nutshell, what is Spark? It is a big data processing framework, a cluster-based framework wherein your processing is distributed into multiple nodes, multiple computers. Okay. And it is specifically used for complex data processing or big data processing. It's a framework. Spark is a framework, right? Which is specifically used for big data processing. And I think this much information is sufficient for you right now at this moment. Okay. All right. So we've just pulled in a data flow activity over here, and let's see the settings of data flow activity. So over here, uh, now you have this data flow. You can select the data flow. We're going to create a new data flow, of course. So you can select an existing data flow, and again, data flow like data sets or link services are reusable across multiple pipelines. You create a data flow and that can be reused across multiple pipelines. So when you drag and drop a data flow, you have an option to select an existing data flow, or you can create a new data flow over here. Okay. The integration runtime, it is the Azure integration runtime. So I'll keep the default one. Compute size. So see, as I mentioned, data flow uses Spark cluster, and Spark is a data processing framework, right? Big data processing framework, where it uses a cluster-based processing. So for which you have to select the compute size, whether you want small, medium, large, or custom, right? Like if let's say you select medium over here, then this is what the medium comes with. It's a general purpose with 8 cores processing power it comes with, right? Now you don't have an option to select how many nodes in a cluster that you want under small, medium, large, because that's something Data Factory will decide on demand how many node cluster you want, right? But then you can have something called as custom. In custom, you can select your own driver cores however you want to configure it. Let's say you want 16 core, 64 core, or whatever. And then you have, of course, memory optimized and general purpose compute type of nodes that you could select. Okay, that's what you could select in a data flow. So basically, you can configure your cluster, with some basic information. There is not a lot of information that you can configure over here. Okay, so for beginners, just keep it small. Okay, which is a general purpose compute cluster with 4 driver cores. Okay, just keep it small. To the beginner purpose. Okay. All right. So we've configured this particular setting, and now let's click a new so that it will create a new data flow for us. Okay. Now it has created a new data flow. You see, this is the name of the data flow. I'll click on its properties to get rid of it. Now data flow has its own set of transformations. The way when you create a pipeline, you get to see all these activities. If you're following my cursor on the left hand side, if you see all these activities that you get to see, like general, iterations, conditions, and all the ones that we've seen so far. Similarly, data flow has its own set of activities, okay, which is specifically for used or designed for data transformation. The first activity is source. Of course, you have to use a source, which is the starting point. Just click on the source and then it will add a source over here, and then of course you have to configure the source options over here, the different source options over here. So I'll give a name of it, and then source type as data set or inline. Now, when you have to select a source type, you can have either select a data set or you can either select inline. Now, what is inline? What is data set? Data set is nothing but your same data sets which you've been using so far. Like if the source that you want to try to connect, if that is already present in one of the data sets available in over here in Data Factory, like if I go to any of the pipeline, and if you see these data sets over here, so if your source is already available over here in any of the data sets, then you can very well use that data set over here. If you see in the drop down, you will get to see the same data sets as you get to see over here. And but then if you want to create a data set which is specifically for data flow, then in that case you could use inline, and inline data sets are only used within the data flow. Okay, so in that case use inline, and then you have a bunch of options to connect to your inline data sets. I mean, these data sets are a little limited compared to this data set, but then you can use, of course, use inline data set, but that is specifically used for this inside data flow. Okay, so we are going to stick to data sets and click on new, and these are all the different types of dataset connectors that are available. Now there is some limitation when it comes to selecting a dataset in a data flow. Okay, now you only have option to go select to connect to Amazon S3, Azure. I think all the Azure objects you can connect to. Dataverse also Azure, then Dynamics, Google Cloud, Microsoft Fabric, Salesforce, Snowflake. That's it. All the below one, which is usually available, like all these options that you see, these are usually available, when you create a data set outside data flow in a copy activity or any other activity. When you create a data flow, these are usually available, but over here you see these are disabled, because data flow doesn't support connecting to all these sources. It only supports connecting to these source systems. Okay. Now just select anything. Let's say we select our data lake. Okay. I click on continue my file. I click on continue and I say data lake gen 2 and I select my file. Where is my file? emp.cac, and I click OK. All right. So basically, I've created a data set over here, and again, this data set is available over here as well. Delimited text too. If you see over here, delimited text too, it's available over here. So the data set, if you create within a data flow, you can see it or you can use it anywhere outside the data flow in any other pipeline as well. Okay. But when you create an inline data set, which is this one, you can only use it within a data flow. You cannot use it outside a data flow. That's the difference, right? So I'll again select this, and then you get a few options like allow schema drift. Schema drift is nothing but, let's say, in the source, if the schema changes, like the columns changes, then this setting will, if you enable this setting, then your data flow, your pipeline will not fail, but then it will allow all the incoming fields from your source to flow through the data flow towards the sink. So your any it this setting will handle any changes in the schema in the source system. Okay. And then infer drifted column types. Let's see what this does. So this is nothing but for the new fields, like the drifted column types, right? The drifted columns for any new fields that are there in the source, which this setting detects, it will automatically determine its data type. Based on the type of data, it will try to determine its data type. So you can select this as well. And validate schema. This usually should not be selected with allow schema drift, because then setting this option will cause data flow to fail if any column and type defined in the projection does not match the discovered. So basically, if you enable this option of validate schema, and let's say in the source one new column gets added, right? Then what data flow will do is that it will compare the schema of the source versus what it already has in its system, right? And if it finds that there is a schema mismatch, then it will just fail your system. So this is something that is opposite of the schema drift. So ideally, validate schema and schema drift should not be selected simultaneously, so I'll probably deselect this. Okay. So these are the source settings. Then you have different source options, a bunch of options. You can explore this at your own convenience. We usually won't require anything at this moment, but then if there is any wildcard over here, path like star dot star, that kind of stuff, you can use that. And then if there is any list of files and all that stuff, a lot of options. Projection is nothing but your schema. This is where it determines the schema. Okay. And of your source data. Optimize is any partitioning that you want to use. Okay. We'll just select the default as use current partitioning. Inspect is nothing but again the column of input schema. And data preview is very important. Data preview is where you can see the data. Okay, you can preview the data. Okay, we'll see this data preview in a few moments. Okay, so this is how you can configure a source. Now you can have as many source transformation as you want. This is just one of it. I can add 2, 3, 4, any source transformation, connect it to all any source systems which it supports, and then later on you could join it, you can transform the data, you can merge it, you can filter it, you can do a whole bunch of activities, right? So I'll probably delete this, and I'll probably delete this as well. Okay, so that's it. So we've added one source transformation, our first transformation. And now if you want to add new transformations, you see a plus icon over here. Okay, after source. So if you click on it, this is where you get to see all the other transformations in data flow. These are all the other transformations that are available. Like for example, you have join, union, lookup, derived column, ranking functions, sorting, filtering, and everything. Sync is again your destination, right? So these are all the different transformations that are available. We are going to see a few of this transformation just to give you a heads up, just to give you some information about it. And of course, you can analyze and research for the rest of them. Okay. All right. Thank you so much. See you in the next session. Okay. Welcome back. So now let's see the next transformation. This time we are going to see a join transformation. Okay, for join, we need two sources, right? Because we're going to join two sources. So first one, this is, let's name this something differently. This is, we call it EMP underscore CSV. Okay. And now let's add one more source. I click on source and let's give this a name, department CSV. Okay. This time let's create, oops, I think it doesn't, provide name contains invalid characters. Okay, looks like I don't know why it didn't support. Let's take it department. Okay, fine. So this time we'll create an inline data set. Okay. Now in inline data set, let's see what options we got. We got Azure SQL Database and all the other options. Let's see if we got file. No. Okay. Let's see, huh? We got databases, files. We have, it's a delimited text file, right? So let's create a CSV, delimited text CSV. Okay. Now link service. Okay. Now either we can create a new link service or we could use an existing one. I'll use an existing link service. Okay. And then anything else? No. In the source options, we select a file name. Okay, we select browse. I have a file in my data lake account which I want to select basically. So I have a file department.csv. Okay, let's select this file and rest. I think I'll keep everything default. Okay, first row as header. This is important. I'll just select first row as header and the rest everything is default. Okay, projection, no column exists in schema but columns may be still red. Okay, I think I'll keep it default. I'm just checking why it's not getting, it's able to read the part. Oh, okay, it will do that once I start this data flow. Okay, once I start this data flow, optimize default, inspect default, data preview also default. Okay, so basically we've added two sources, employee underscore CSV, department underscore CSV. Okay, the next thing is that we have to start the data flow. Basically, we have to start our Spark cluster. Remember, data flow is nothing but a Spark cluster that runs behind the scene. So we have to start the Spark cluster. So if you see the toggle button, I've just clicked on it, and the integration and time is default. Debug time to live. Basically, it will determine that if there is no action, or if nothing is running, what is the time that you want to keep this running. You can't keep this running forever, right? If the data flow finishes its execution, after that, for the next 1 hour, if nothing is running, no data flow is running, then this data flow can terminate itself. So basically the Spark cluster can terminate itself. Okay, that's what it means, debug time to live. Okay, and it is saying getting the cluster ready. So it's going to take a few minutes. It's going to take around 3 to 4 minutes or 5 minutes at least, right? And while it's getting ready, let's add our join transformation. Okay, so click on plus over here and click on join. Okay, so it added this join transformation. So let's see what options we got in join. And you see data flow debug is clusters ready. It was pretty quick. So you see this green icon, green check mark, that means the cluster is ready right now. Okay, and when you run this in production, when you schedule this pipeline in production, over there also it is going to take 1 or 2 minutes to start the cluster, to start the data flow. If you're using data flow, we have just started this cluster because we want to run it in debug mode. This is a debug mode cluster that we have started. Okay, okay, join, join, obviously join accepts two inputs. Like, it's a typical join of our SQL. In our TSQL, whatever join we have, okay, join accepts two inputs. So there are two tables. Left stream, it is EMP CSV. Right, we have department CSV. Right, and the moment I select department, you see that it has just connected this. Okay. All right, so now there are 5 different types of joins: full outer join, inner join, left outer join, right outer join, and custom cross join. Okay, this is a typical same join the way we've seen it in SQL since a long time. We've been seeing joins for a long, long time. If you don't know what is join, then please stop this video right now and Google about join, because I'm not going to explain about joins. It is very, very basic concept. So what join you want to consider? Let's say I want to consider inner join right now, right? Now, if I say inner join or whatever join condition type I select, we have to of course select the fields on which we want to join, right? So I want to join it on there is a department ID column in my left table, which is this employee CSV file. And there is a department ID table. Oops, but why it didn't come? Uh, equal. Okay, let's check why it did not pop up over here, because the department table also has over here. Okay, so let's see. In the department one, let's click on data preview and let's say refresh. And let's see how the department table looks like. The file department CSV. So when you say refresh at the backend, it is going to go to this source location and get the data for us. Okay, so it's going to take probably a few seconds or maybe a minute. Okay, so it says department ID, department name. These are the two fields. And let's see in the projection, let's say import schema, and I'll just say import. So it's going to import the schema basically. Okay, so department ID it has imported, department name also it has imported, and let's explore this option. No, we don't want to change the format. Okay, now if I go to join, now it will show me. So now in the drop down, I can see department ID over here, right? In the drop down. But then there is a mismatch. You see 1, 2, S, it is sort of a string and sorry, it is a numeric, and then this is a string, department ID is string. Right, so let's change the data type. Let's see if we could change the data type. Oops, let me correct this. And projection, the department ID, I will select as int, integer. Okay. Over here in my employee table, I'll change the data type. See, this is the by default. It has interpreted the data type, but we can of course go and change it. In a department table also, I will say integer, just to be sure. And now it shouldn't give us this mismatch. You see, it did not give us the mismatch. So basically, I'm doing an inner join between my employee and department, and based on department ID from employee table and department ID from my department table. My department source, not table actually. These are source, right? All right. And then optimize, of course, just keep it default. Inspect, these are the output that it's going to give you. Data preview. Now, data preview is very important. Now, you cannot run this, or you cannot trigger this pipeline without having a sync, because, of course, I mean, there has to be a sync, right? So you cannot do that. Every data flow has to have a source and has to have a sync, the bare minimum, right? You cannot run it. But if you want to check your logic, if it's correct or not, just in after every transformation you'll have a data preview option. So just hit refresh, and then it's going to run the data preview, and then it's going to give you the output so that you can check whether your output is correct or not. Okay, so now ideally it should give us the output now in a few seconds. Cool. So now if you see, these are the columns from my employee table, the first four columns, the next two columns are from my department table. Sorry, I keep saying table. It's actually my employee source and department source, right? So if you see, we've joined on department ID. So department ID 2 stands for IT, 3 stands for finance, which is why you get to see finance over here. All right. And this data preview option is available only when you enable the debug mode, huh? Only when you enable the debug mode, only then you get to see this data preview option, because when you click on data preview, it hits the Spark cluster, and the Spark cluster comes into action, and then it gives you the data, right? So now basically our join is working perfectly. This is how we got to know. So basically we don't have to run our entire pipeline to check our logic. Using data preview, we could very well verify the logic, after each transformation. Okay. All right, so this is it about join. Please do explore about this join as well. And thank you for watching. See you in the next session. So, welcome back. Now, so far we've seen a source transformation, a join transformation, and now the next transformation we are going to see is nothing but select transformation, right? And sort as well. We're going to see sort and select, the two transformations. Okay. Now the output of join, if you see, there are a lot of duplicate columns, like this department ID is coming twice, and I don't want the employee ID as well. I just want the employee name, salary, and the department, right? So how do we get rid of this addition, this columns, right? So click on plus and click on select. Okay, this is the select transformation. So in select you can do that. So over here, if you see, let's remove this. Okay, you can also rename an existing column and you can remove an existing column. So I'm going to remove this employee ID. I'm going to remove department ID as well, and I'm going to keep and the department ID as well. So I'm just going to keep this three field names and I'm going to rename it as employee name, salary, I'll keep it default, and department name. Okay, so this is what I'm going to rename this existing column. Cool. And if I go to my data preview, it should only show me three fields now. Okay, let's see. Wonderful. So employee name, salary, department, and it also we have also renamed our field, right? So select is one very simple transformation. Next is sort. Okay, now I want to sort based on my salary. So I'll again click on plus and I'll search for sort. Okay, and I'm gonna sort by, let's say, salary, right? So salary. And what is the order, ascending or descending? Let's say descending. Okay, I can also add more columns to it. Okay, and that's how I can add I can sort the data. Okay, and if I go to data preview and hit refresh, I should be able to see the data sorted by salary, with the highest salary. Okay, with the descending order, you see it has sorted based on the salary. No, wait, it has not sorted correctly. Why? Because our salary is of the type ABC. This ABC indicates it's a string data type. So let's go to our employee table. Okay, in a projection, in the salary, let's change it to integer. Okay, and then again go to sort under data preview, hit refresh. Now it should correctly show the salary or sort the salary. Wonderful. If you see, it has now sorted it. And you see this three letters that indicates the data type. Okay. So this 5555 4444 3333 456. So it has successfully sorted it as well. Okay. Cool. So we've seen select transformation and we've seen sort transformation as well. Now in the next session, we are going to see the sync transformation. So basically we've read the data, we've transformed it, like we've joined it, we've removed unwanted column, we've sorted it. So we've done some basic transformation, right? And now we're going to load this data in our destination, right? So stay tuned for the next session. All right, welcome back. So now in this session, we are going to see the sync transformation. So basically, we've done a bunch of transformation, right? So far in our data flow. Now it's time to load our data into our destination. Okay, so what we're going to do is that we're going to load this data into a SQL database, in a table in SQL database. Okay, so in my SQL database, Azure SQL database, I'm creating a simple table, create table emp underscore new, and with the schema as employee name, salary, department ID. Sorry, it's department name, and I'm going to say it as varchar. And okay, so I'm going to create this simple table and I'm going to populate this table, right? So select run. Okay, so table created. Going to my data factory, click on plus over here after sort, and let me search for sync. Okay, so I've added a sync over here. Now let's configure its setting. So sync SQL DB. I've just given a name to it. Okay. Now sync type, you again have a data set inline similar to our source, and you have another option called as cache. So you can also cache your data in between, like probably like after a lookup or something, you can cache your data and then you can use that in your sync. Okay, but for now we're going to select a data set. Oops, I think it doesn't like underscore, looks like. Okay, so I'm going to select a data set and I'm going to create a new data set as SQL database. Okay, click on continue, link service, an existing link service, table name in a drop down. I'm going to say emp underscore new and click OK. Okay, so I'm basically selecting a table which I just created and allow schema drift. That's fine. Under settings, now you can insert data, you can delete, upsert, and also update, right? So I'm gonna just select insert because I want to insert the data. Uh, Table action, like do you want to recreate the table every time or like truncate, like recreating table is nothing but drop and create. Do you want to do that or do you want to truncate the table? All rows from target table will get removed, right? Before you load the data, it will truncate the tables. So there's option for that as well. I'll select none. There are some pre-SQL scripts and post-SQL script. So basically, before loading the data, do you want to run a set of SQL script, a set of SQL statements? If yes, then you can write those SQL scripts over here. It could be any SQL script. It could be a truncate statement. It could be a select clause. It could be update clause, whatever you want to do, right? So these statements will get executed before it loads the data, before it populates the table. Okay. Post SQL script is nothing but what you want to do after loading the data. Let's say you load the data. After that, if you want to perform some post SQL statements, if you have, then you can write your SQL script and it is going to execute it. Okay. But for now, I'll just keep it blank. Okay. Errors, if there are any errors, do you want to redirect it to a separate table? If yes, then you can have a link service for that and you can give a table name and all that stuff. What do you do if error happens, like settings for when a row causes an error while being written to a SQL database? Do you want to stop on the first error or you want to continue on error? You can select that. There's a transaction commit as well that you can select, and then you can output it to a separate file as well, and all that stuff. So pretty self-explanatory, but right now we're going to skip this part, the error handling part right now. Mapping. So basically, you can map the source and destination target, right? It's gonna auto map it based on the field name. If the field name is the same, it's gonna auto map it for you. If not, you will have to do it manually. So now my field names in the source and destination are not same. Like I have employee name in the source, I have EMP name in the target, right? So I'm going to manually do it. I've deselected this auto mapping and I'm going to manually select this department name, employee name. Okay. Salary, it already, auto mapped it. All right. So we have mapped the fields. Optimize, I'll keep it default. Inspect also default. Data preview, let's hit refresh and then see what data preview shows us. Okay, data preview is a very, very excellent way to test your logic, if the entire logic is flowing correctly or not. And looks like my entire logic is flowing correctly, because I was expecting 4 records and I have 4 records with the correct department associated to it. Okay. Cool. So we have created our data flow. Okay. And let's publish it. Let's publish it. Look, looks like I haven't published it, my changes for a long time. So I'll publish everything so that it all gets saved and we are safe over there. All right. So let me close all these activities, all these pipelines. Okay, so this is the data flow that we created, right? And this is the pipeline in which we are using this data flow. But if you see the data flows, you see data flow over here as right. So you can reuse this data flow anywhere else. Like the name of it is data flow one. So if I go to pipeline number two, and if I drag and drop a data flow activity over here in the settings, in the drop down, I can select a data flow. So over here, right? The data flow one over here. So basically, these data flows are independent of any pipeline. These are global. Okay, you can create a data flow and use it anywhere else as well. Okay, all right, close and discard. So if you want to run it now, so far we have been just doing it our debug mode, right? We have been just doing checking the data in the data preview section because we have enabled the debug mode over here. But now let's run our pipeline. Okay, let's run our pipeline. So if we go to add trigger and say trigger now, and click on OK. And let's go to our monitoring section, and over here let's see. Now remember, over here it's going to take a little while, not because we are writing any complex logic, but because it has to start the cluster for data flow, right? It has to start the cluster. So the cluster startup time is going to be there. It's going to be a few seconds, probably a minute at the max. Okay, so let's wait for it to complete, and then we'll check the output in the SQL database. All right, so our pipeline ran successfully. I got a notification. Let's refresh it. Cool. So now let's go to our SQL database and let's query our table. Remember, it's a new table that we created, so it was blank, but now it should have 4 records. All right, cool. So it has 4 records with the proper header and with the expected values, right? So, all right. So looks like our pipeline is working fine, working as expected. And so this is how you can populate the data, right? You can populate the data uh, over here. And if I go back to my pipeline, and my data flow. Okay, so this is how we saw a sync component. Okay, if you don't have a sync, then your pipeline won't run. You'll get an error because every data flow has to have a source and has to have a sync as well. Okay, all right, thank you for watching and see you in the next session. All right, welcome back. So in this session, we are going to see one very important topic, which is called parameters. So in Data Factory, you can create parameters at multiple levels. Okay, so, and basically, why do we need parameters? We typically use parameters to change the behavior of a particular object at runtime, so that we could have a dynamic capability, give a dynamic capability to that particular object. Okay, um, this is a formal definition, but of course, let's deep dive into the how do you implement a parameters. Okay, so different types of parameters you can create in Data Factory. First one is global parameters. Okay, so this is global. I mean, the name itself tells you these are global parameters. These parameters are accessible for all the pipelines. Okay, then there is pipeline parameters. This is a parameter specific for a pipeline. Okay, then you have linked service parameters, like you can parameterize a linked service as well. You have dataset parameters, you can parameterize a dataset. Then you have data flow parameters, you can parameterize a data flow as well. Okay, now what are some key differences to remember? Global parameters are accessible for all pipelines. Okay, these are accessible for all pipelines. So these global parameters are only accessible on pipelines. If you want to access this global parameter in link service, you cannot do that. In dataset, you cannot do that. Only in all the pipelines you can access these global parameters, right? These are accessible only to a specific pipeline in which it was created. Okay, so these are pipeline specific parameters, and these are linked service specific. These are dataset specific. Link service specific access, or its value can be set in a dataset. Okay, and don't worry, we're going to see this. How do you do that? Dataset specific, but its value can be set or passed in a pipeline. Okay, and this is also data flow specific, and its value can be set in a pipeline. All right, so these are the different types of parameters that you can create, and let's deep dive. Let's start creating these parameters. Okay, so this is my data factory. I'm going to open existing. Okay, before we do that, let's see where do we create a global parameters. Go to manage tab over here, and there is a oh, there you go. So over here you have this global parameters over here. Okay, so I already have a global parameter created, and you can of course create any number of parameters. Just click on new and say global param2, define the data type of it, and also give a default value. Okay, and click on save. So this way you can create as many global parameters as you want and give a default value to those global parameters. Okay, very simple. Now when it comes to pipeline parameters, how do you create pipeline parameters? Go to any pipeline. Let's say this is my existing pipeline. Okay, in any pipeline, if you go and don't click on any activity, just click on this blank area anywhere, and you'll see a parameters option over here. Now click on new parameter, and that is where you can create a pipeline parameter. Pretty simple, right? Default value, right? You can create again as many pipeline parameters as you want, and all the pipelines you can do that. Now if you see, I created these pipeline parameters over here in pipeline 1, but in pipeline 2 I can't see that parameter because that is a specific for pipeline 1, right? So I'll have to create a separate parameters over here for pipeline 2. Okay, now when it comes to link services, go to manage option over here. The manage, go to link services. This is my SQL database. Over here, if you see, if you scroll down, you have a parameters option over here, and just click on new and just give a name, give a data, select a data type, give a default value. That's it. You have your link service parameter. Now, I've already created a link service parameter over here, and I've used it as well. Okay, I'll show you that in just a moment. How do you use that? Click on cancel. Next was datasets, right? Let's go to datasets. Again, go to author. These are my datasets. I pick any dataset. In every dataset, you'll find a parameters tab over here. Click on new dataset, and this is my dataset parameter. And you can give a default value to it. Okay, over there. Now that's how you can create a parameter. Okay, again in data flow as well you can do that. Let me quickly show you that. This is my data flow. Okay, you'll have to go to the pipeline for that where you're using the data flow. Now this is a data flow I'm using in this pipeline, right? So you have a data flow at parameters tab over here, but if you want to create new parameters, you have to go to the actual data flow. So this is my actual data flow over here. If you see, just click anywhere over here in the blank area and you see parameters. When if you click new parameter, this is my data flow parameter. Okay, I'll say data flow param over here, default value data type. Okay, and if I go back to my pipeline now, if you see, if I select this data flow under parameters, I can see this data flow parameter which I just created. Okay, so this is how you create parameters. Now let's see how do you uh, pass value to, how do you pass value to these parameters. Okay, let's look at that. Now global parameter, of course you can set a default value. In pipeline parameter, okay, now let's say there is an activity over here somewhere. I've created a parameter in pipeline 1. Let's say in pipeline 2 I use this execute pipeline activity. Okay, now what this activity does, it basically calls another pipeline, it executes another pipeline, right? So I select this pipeline 1. Now since pipeline 1 accepts a parameter or expects a parameter, which is why it is asking you for this parameter pipeline param, right? And you can give a value over here. Okay, any value that you want to pass on. Now if you have created a parameter over here like pipeline 2 param, you can pass the value over here. Go to add dynamic content, and if you see, you can pass the value. Just click on this and it will add the syntax. You don't have to worry about the syntax. Okay, so this is how you pass the value for a parameter, right? And you can also pass the value from a global parameter. Like if you want to pass the value of a global parameter to a pipeline parameter, that's how you can pass it, right? So you can pass a value to parameter, pipeline parameter. Also, how do you use the parameters? Wherever you see this add dynamic content, basically every text box wherever you see, you'll find an option called as add dynamic content. In the add dynamic content, if you click, there is a parameters option over there, and over there you're going to see all the global parameters and all the pipeline parameters. Remember, you are not going to see your dataset parameters or your global parameters over here. Sorry, your dataset parameters or your link service parameters or your data flow parameters. You are only going to see your global parameters and your pipeline parameters. Okay. So you can, of course, use those in any pipelines, right? This is about the pipeline parameters and this is about your global parameters. Let's look into your linked service parameters. Now I have created a link service which uses a parameters, right? Let's go to that. Okay. So if I open this, now this is link service, Azure SQL Database. This I have created a parameter, link service parameter, and I have used that parameter over here. Let's say there is a server name. At runtime, I want to change the server name, right? I want to change this, make this link service parameterized so that at runtime, I may pass a value of a dev server or I may pass value of a production server. Anything I could pass, right? Even passwords I could pass, and I'm using it over here. You see, since there was this add dynamic content over here, if you just click on it, uh, I just selected this and it added it over here, right? So link service parameter has been added over there, and I click cancel. So this is how you can use your link service parameter. Now, how do you pass value to your link service parameter? Basically, wherever you are using your link service, and you typically use your link service only in datasets, only in dataset. So this is one dataset in which I'm using this link service, Azure SQL Database. So as soon as you select this link service, it is going to prompt you for a value for this parameter. Okay. Now you can pass a hard coded value, or else you could again click on add dynamic content and write your custom expression, or else what you could do is that create a dataset parameter. Like I'll create this dataset parameter and then I'll come back to this and add dynamic content and I'll select this dataset parameters. So basically what I'm doing is that I'm passing a dataset parameter, the value of a dataset parameter to my link service parameter. That's what I'm doing, right? That's how you pass value over there. And then if you go to your pipeline, where is my pipeline? Over here, now you can pass wherever you're selecting your dataset, you can pass value to your dataset as well, parameter as well. So I click on add dynamic content over here, and now I can select any pipeline parameter or any global parameter. Anything that I want to select, I can do that and I can select it. Okay. And this is how I've passed the value to my dataset parameter. So basically how it works is that I'll show you graphically. So your global parameters, you pass it to the dataset parameters. That's what we've done, right? We have passed, this is my dataset parameter. I'm using it in pipeline, right? Dataset parameter. So I'm passing the value of my global parameter to my dataset parameter, right? And inside your dataset parameter, you pass a value to your link service parameter. So this is my dataset, and in dataset I'm using a link service. So for link service, I'm passing the value of my dataset parameter, right? And then this link service value is going to be set. So basically what typically people do is that they create a global parameter called a server name. Let's say, okay, I'm just taking an example. They create a global parameter called a server name. That server name, they pass it to their dataset parameter, and that same dataset parameter, they pass it to this link service. So basically the server name gets passed from global to parameter to dataset parameter and to link service parameter. And then in link service, you are using that link service, right? In the link service, if I go, you're using the link service parameter in the server name option over here. That's how you can set parameterize your link service. It's a bit of hierarchy that you have to follow, simply because in link service you do not get to see any of the global parameters directly over here, or your pipeline parameters directly over here, right? Which is why you have to follow that hierarchy of global parameters passing the value to link dataset parameters passing the value to link service parameter, right? That is why we are following that hierarchy over here if you want to set a server name or if you want to parameterize your link service. There are also options that you might want to use your dataset parameters over here in my table name, let's say. let's say I don't want to use this, let's say, and I want to use my dataset parameter as a table name. So in my pipeline, okay, in my pipeline, I can pass a table name over here. I can pass some table name, whatever I want to pass. It can also come from these parameters, right? My global parameter or pipeline parameter, or I could hard code it. So I've hard coded a table name in my data set, in my pipeline. So I'm basically passing a table name in my pipeline to my data set. And in my data set, I'm parameterizing my table name using a dataset parameter. That is also possible. So there are multiple of ways in which you can parameterize or you can pass the value. The hierarchy which I explained, that is only uh, applicable when you have to parameterize your link service, because there is no way you can pass a value to a link service from a pipeline directly. You have to pass a value to your dataset parameter, and then dataset parameter has to be assigned to your link service parameter, right? That's the chain that you have to follow. But then, of course, there are other options. If you want to set a value to a table in a dataset or anything else, you can do that as well. Okay, that that's it. That's about parameters. There are multiple combinations that you could use. Please do explore it. Just remember the scope of each parameter. That's very important. That a pipeline parameter or a global parameter, you cannot use it in a data set. A data set parameter, you cannot use it in a link service or in a pipeline, right? A link service parameter, you cannot use it in a pipeline. So just remember this, the scope of each parameter, which I have written it over here, right? Pipeline parameters are accessible only to a specific pipeline in which it was created. Link service specific, but then access or its value can be set in a data set, but can be accessed, or its value can be set in a data. Sorry, it cannot be accessed. Link service parameters are link service specific, and its value can be set only in a data set, right? Only in a data set its value can be set. You can only pass a value to a link service parameter from a data set, right? In dataset parameters, it's dataset specific, but its value can be set or passed in a pipeline. So you can use a pipeline parameter to pass a value to a dataset parameter. Okay. All right, that is it about parameters. Parameters are very, very important to have a dynamic capability for your pipelines. So it is a little advanced topic, but then it is very, very useful. Okay, thank you so much. Have a good one.